In 1988, Badiou wrote Being an Event. It is one of the most ambitious philosophy books of the late 20th century. Badiou wanted to rescue philosophy from what he saw as its intellectual prison. For decades, European philosophy had been dominated by postmodern thinkers who argued that everything is just language, text, and interpretation. They claimed grand truths were dead and philosophy could no longer make sweeping claims about reality. Badiou rebelled against all of this. He wanted to bring back absolute truth, universal justice, and genuine world shaking change. But Badiou knew he could not simply repeat old philosophical formulas. He could not rely on God or the spirit of history or an unchanging human nature. Instead, he made a breathtaking assertion. Mathematics is the study of being itself. When philosophers use the word ontology, they mean the study of reality at its most basic level. Badiou claims that philosophers have tried for thousands of years to describe pure existence using poetic language and they have failed. The only discipline that can accurately think about pure existence without falling into religious or mystical traps is mathematics, specifically a branch known as set theory. Every philosophy of existence must start with a fundamental question. Is the universe ultimately a unified one, or is it a chaotic multiple? For centuries, Western philosophy prioritized the one. Thinkers argued that beneath the chaotic variety of our daily experiences, there is a fundamental unity. Whether they called it God, nature, or the cosmos, they assumed that being is fundamentally a whole harmonious system. Badiou completely rejects this. He declares the one is not. If the one is not, then what actually exists? Badiou answers that pure reality is the inconsistent multiple. Imagine a chaos of endless, shifting, infinite fragments with no overarching boundary, no cosmic blueprint, and no final total sum. Pure existence is a vast, ununified mess where elements are simply loose and scattered. But if pure reality is a chaotic mess, why does our daily world look so orderly? Why do we see distinct objects, clear identities, and stable social structures? Badiou explains that while pure reality is inconsistent, our human structures force it to become consistent. He calls this process the count as one. Human societies, languages, and biological systems act like templates. They step into chaotic sea of pure existence and draw a circle around a specific group of elements, declaring this collection will now be treated as single unified thing. Think of a modern nation state. In reality, millions of diverse human beings are scattered across a territory. The state steps in with its legal system and performs a count as one, transforming this massive chaos into a single object called the citizenry. The one is not a fact of nature, it is an artificial grid dropped over a chaotic world to make it manageable. To track how this artificial order operates, Badiou introduces precise vocabulary: the situation and the state of the situation. A situation is any structured domain of existence. It can be a language, a political party, an ecosystem, or a romantic relationship. Every situation is a structured multiplicity where the count as one has been applied. Inside any given situation, we find elements that belong to it. An element belongs to a situation if it is recognized by the structure and counted as a distinct unit. Badiou refers to this basic level of structural recognition as presentation. However, a single structure is never enough to secure absolute order. there is always a danger that the chaotic reality beneath the surface will break through the cracks. Therefore, every situation requires a second layer of structure, which Badiou calls the state of the situation or the meta structure. The state does not just count individual elements, it organizes them into groups, subsets, and institutions. If the situation represents presentation, the state represents representation. To use a modern analogy, imagine a large university. The situation is the basic collection of all individual students, professors, and desks on campus. They are simply presented there. The state of the situation is the administrative bureaucracy. It takes those individual students and organizes them into majors, GPA tiers, and student ID numbers. The state's job is to ensure that everything is double counted and perfectly classified. It wants to make sure there are no loose, unregulated elements floating around that could disrupt the smooth operation of the institution. Using set theory, Badiou discovers a fundamental flaw built into every system of order. This flaw is known as the theorem of the point of excess. Mathematically, the number of subsets within any given set is always strictly larger than the number of individual elements in that set. In Badiou's terms, this means that the state is always larger than the situation. There is a permanent structural gap between representation and presentation. The administrative apparatus of any given system will always overclassify and create an excess of bureaucratic categories. Because the state is obsessed with double counting everything, it inevitably creates a blind spot. Badiou differentiates between three types of terms that can exist within any system. Normal terms are elements that both belong to the situation and are included in the state. They are fully presented and fully represented. Think of a middle class citizen who has a valid ID, pays taxes, and fits perfectly into the state's economic categories. Excrescent terms are elements that are represented by the state but have no real active presentation in the actual situation. This is pure bureaucratic excess, like a committee that exists on paper but performs no real work. Singular terms are the most crucial category. A singular term is an element that belongs to the situation but is completely ignored and unrecognized by the state. It is structurally invisible to the rulers of the system. When a singular term is completely stripped of any representation, Badiou refers to it as being on the edge of the void. The void is the empty set, the set that contains no elements. For Badiou, the void is the ultimate truth of any situation. It is a raw, chaotic reality that the artificial structure tries to hide. When an entire collection of singular terms clusters together, they form an eventual site. An eventual site is a zone within society that is completely marginalized and unrecognized by the official powers. It is physically present, but according to the state's records, it does not exist. It is from these invisible, marginalized sites that radical revolutions and breakthroughs are born. A situation can remain stable for decades, with the state continuously double counting its elements and keeping the eventual sites suppressed. But genuine change cannot happen through gradual reform. True transformation requires an absolute rupture, the event. An event is an unpredictable flash of lightning occurrence that takes place at an eventual site. It is something that cannot be predicted or explained using the existing laws of the situation. It breaks completely with normal routine. Badiou provides a mathematical structure for the event. An event is a unique multiple that consists of two things: the marginalized elements of the eventual site that were previously ignored, and the event itself, which must include its own name in its definition. Because an event is completely outside official knowledge, it creates a crisis of language. The state's official vocabulary has no words to describe it. Therefore, an event is a paradox. It can only be recognized if it names itself. Let us look at concrete historical examples. In politics, consider the French Revolution of 1789. The eventful sight was the massive, uncounted underclass of Paris who had no voice under the royal regime. The storming of the Bastille was an event. It was an unpredictable explosion that could not be managed by the king's laws. In science, consider Einstein's theory of relativity. These breakthroughs were not simple updates to existing textbooks. They were radical events that shattered established scientific knowledge. In art, consider the arrival of Cubism through Picasso. These events completely broke with traditional laws of perspective. In love, consider a sudden life-changing encounter where two strangers fall into a deep love. This encounter is an event. It cannot be planned or calculated. Badiou notes that an event is completely evanescent. It appears like a flash of lightning, shakes the foundations of the situation, and then immediately vanishes. It does not leave behind a permanent machine of change. Once the flash is gone, the world naturally tries to slide back into its old routines. The state rushes in to minimize what happened, calling it a fluke, a riot, or a temporary madness. An event has occurred and vanished. The old world is trying to erase its memory. It is at this precise moment that the human being is faced with a choice. This choice is the foundation of Badiou's ethics of truth. A truth is not an abstract fact waiting to be discovered. A truth is an active process that must be constructed in the wake of an event. For a truth to exist, it requires a subject. Badiou defines the subject in a unique way. You are not born a subject, being a regular human individual, eating, sleeping, and chasing selfish pleasures does not make you a subject. You only become a subject when you link your life to the memory of an event and commit yourself to carrying its consequences to the world. Badiou calls this commitment fidelity. Fidelity is the long, hard work of tracing out a truth. It means looking at every element of your daily situation and asking, how does this look now in the light of the revolution? How do I behave now in the light of the love I confessed? A truth process must create a new subset within the situation that represents the event's lessons. But because this truth is meant to be universal and open to everyone, this subset cannot be defined by any exclusive identity. It cannot belong only to the rich or to one specific race. Therefore, the subset must be generic. A true political movement is generic because it does not fight for special interests. It fights for universal rights of humanity. Through fidelity, the subject engages in forcing. Forcing is an act of radical imagination. It is the process where a subject stands in the present world and boldly declares, we are going to act as if the future truth we are building is already a recognized fact. Forcing is what allows a revolutionary movement to write laws for a free society while still living under a dictatorship. It is what allows an artist to paint using a new language before the public learns how to read it. Because the pursuit of truth requires such intense energy, it is constantly vulnerable to corruption. Badiou warns that whenever humanity engages with an event, we face three systemic dangers. The first evil is simulacrum, or the fake event. A simulacrum happens when a social movement mimics the form of a genuine event, but replaces the universal core with an exclusive identity-driven dogma. The ultimate historical example is Nazi Germany. The Nazi rise to power looked like a radical event. It used revolutionary language and mass rallies, but it was fake because its core was not open to all humanity. Instead, it was based on the glorification of a specific race and the violent exclusion of others. The second evil is betrayal. This is the simple tragic act of giving up. Tracing a truth through a hostile world is exhausting. The state constantly offers comforts and promotions if you agree to drop your fidelity and fall back into line. Betrayal happens when a subject tells themselves, the event was beautiful but it was an illusion. It is time to grow up and look out of myself. This is the path of the cynical sellout, a total collapse of courage that reduces a former subject back into a passive consumer. The third danger is the disaster. This happens when a subject becomes so fanatical about a truth that they believe it should achieve absolute power instantly, completely erasing all human differences. In mathematics, every set theory has certain limits that cannot be crossed without destroying the system. In philosophy, Badiou argues that every situation has a totalitarian border. If a political movement attempts to force every single human being to think perfectly alike, it creates a bloody dictatorship. This is the tragedy of the Stalinist gulags. The desire for absolute forced perfection turns a liberating truth into an engine of terror. A true subject must recognize that a truth process is an open ended journey. Let us conclude by reviewing Badiou's concept of the four truth conditions. Badiou insists that philosophy does not produce its own truths. Philosophy is an intellectual laboratory whose job is to look out at the world, notice where genuine truths are being built, and provide a unified language to protect them from the state's censorship. According to Badiou, true events and genuine subjectivities can only be born within four specific domains of human life. Politics is the collective fight for universal emancipation, led by the marginalized who demand absolute justice. Science is the realm of pure breakthroughs that smash old habits of thought to reveal the stark logic of the universe. Art is the creative invention of new forms that expand human perception. Love is the intense personal adventure where two individuals collapse their independent egos to experience reality from the perspective of a shared life.